for gigs.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very crisp audio quality. It's very nice.
Well,
Uh,
it's my job, so I should be able to do this kind of thing.
yeah, true. Are you using it for the podcast you've just started?
No, I've got an even fancier mic that I use for the podcast.
Which mic?
I use an Electro Voice RE20, and my brother uses a Shure SM7.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you for letting us interview you.
No problem at all.
It's very exciting. Another field music album coming out soon. I remember that was like the sort of the highlight of January. With all the despair of like last year, that hearing Making a New World was quite a treat during it. I'm very excited. I'm Jake.
I'm Joe.
Hi, Jake. Hi, Joe.
Sorry for our lockdown haircut.
We're all there. We're all. That's exactly where we're all at. It's totally fine.
How have you been finding lockdown and working in it?
I mean, it's been very tricky at times. I've got 2 young children, so whether they are at school or not is the biggest thing. In the first lockdown, we stopped coming at the studio, and the kids were at home. My wife was working from home. In September, the kids went back to school for a bit, and so I could start to have a little bit of time in the studio. Now they're back at school properly. It's been very strange. It's all been very strange.
It has. It definitely has. But I think at the minute there is definitely a lot more hope than I think there was a while back.
I mean, the vaccine, the fact that they've managed to, design and produce a vaccine in this amount of time is totally incredible, and it feels like it at least gives you that glimmer of hope. But yeah, it's going to be difficult for a while. Everyone's got to be kind of patient and hold it together.
Yeah.
I mean, the first question I would like to ask: how different is the music scene since 2005 than it is today?
I mean, in some ways, for us, things work in exactly the same way, but that's because when we started, we very much had this sense that we wanted to be self-contained. We had our own studio, even back then. We made our own records, had a very small team of people around us, and that's what we did. In the wider sense, it's unrecognizable. And occasionally I work with young musicians. And there's a project in Sunderland called the Young Musicians Project that my wife runs. And occasionally they'll come into our studio and I'll help out because I've got a studio, And when they want advice about how to get their music out there, that's a difficult thing for me to have anything useful to add, really, because when we started, there was no streaming. iTunes was brand new. MySpace was brand new. We were at the tail end. We started in our career, if you can call it that, at the tail end of a period where there was a lot of money sloshing around in the music industry. It was still not crazy to imagine the band would get signed to a label and be given a chunk of money to go and make records. It's not like that in anymore. And in a way, what we've done isn't a crazy model for what a young band might do. It's like, okay, well, we can't afford to go into someone's studio, so we're going to figure out how to record ourselves. That's a thing that a lot of people do now. It was a little bit more unusual when we started recording the first album in like November 2003 or whatever it was. So yeah, it's very, very strange. And I try my best to get my head around it. But one of the things that we always did was like, you put yourself in the shoes of a listener. But now the way I listen to music is so different from how, a normal average music consumer listens to it. I still buy CDs. That's the era that I'm from. I don't use streaming services very much, except to show my kids a particular song that I think they'll like. So it's difficult for me to like apply that same principle, and I have to think through it a bit differently.
You touched on definitely some very interesting stuff there. As you were saying, a lot of musicians at the minute just don't have access to studios, and the indie scene from 2005 compared to now is completely different. Like the indie scene now is very bedroom pop because people now have the technology to make music from their bedrooms, and especially now with lockdown, a lot of musicians are doing stuff remotely. The contrast between the two time periods is just incredible.
I mean, how people make music, it always shifts to the technology of the time and also the environment that you're going to make it in. So, like, the style of music you make is made for the place you're going to perform it in a way. And like when we started, I mean, we actually did gigs like in an indie disco. It's like, okay, the indie nightclub is on at 1:00 at Rock Shots or whatever it is. The band goes on, and it's like, so it didn't work like that so much for us, but certainly, around that time with the Future Heads of Maximo Park, it's like, well, you make music which fits within that environment, and that's a pointless thing to do right now. You make music which people are going to share on social media.
I picked up on something you said there. Have you read David Byrne's book, How Music Works, by any chance?
I have.
Yeah, because he mentions that, doesn't he?
He talks about that really well. Yeah, because it changes in an even more extreme way when you look across eras. When music was made to be played in church, basically, or music is made to be played in concert halls, and it always follows that.
How have your thoughts, as well as the music industry's changing? Ask the same question in regards to indie music. How have you found that has changed since 2005? Is it 2004? Sorry, or
2005 was when the first album came out, but actually we sat on the album for a year before it came out. We finished it in the summer of 2004. Back when we weren't very well, we didn't have a label then, and since the end of 2004, we've been with the same label. I mean, I've always felt that we were to the side of indie music, of doing our own thing. We didn't fit in then. We would go and do gigs around the country when our first album came out, and it might say on the posters, like, if you like Kaiser Chiefs, go and see Field Music. And for us, that was like incomprehensible, like not related to that at all. And in a way, I still feel like that. Although, like, now I see it less because I'm an old man and I'm not engaged with new music in the same way. And in 2005, there was like a mainstream of indie music, which was actually popular. And like I say, we were always to the side of it. Since then, because of how listening has changed, everything is fragmented. So, these last couple of weeks, I saw, Maximo Park were in the top 10 in an unusual way, but that's partly because at the moment, the charts aren't driven by nanas buying CDs from Tesco, or Jane Weaver might get in the charts, or next week the Anchoress might get in the charts. So for me, those things are like, that's the indie music that I notice happening. But that's not the indie music which is probably having the biggest impact on the streaming services, or like is getting shared on social media or is on YouTube. So things are so fragmented, you can very much stay within your lane. I'm not sure that's an entirely good thing. I mean, like, me and my brother and the rest of the band are having a laugh every week about watching old Top the Pops from 1990. When we were all old enough to notice it and care. I was 10 in 1990. But the nature of a program like Top of the Pops was everything that was popular in any way got bundled together. So there was rap, and there was soul, and there was novelty records, and there was power ballads, and there was like this kind of like technical guitar rock, which occasionally burst through to the charts. I mean, Iron Maiden got in the charts around then. She got to number 1 around then. it was a crazy mishmash. And that's not possible in the same way now. There's not programs like Top of the Pops where it all just gets chucked in. And if you are in the kind of like algorithmic world of streaming, you always get shown the things which are most like what you're already listening to. And I think in a smaller way, the same thing has happened with indie music.
Yeah, I just think that what you said there is pretty summarized what the whole, I don't know, difference between it is now.
Sorry, I spend too much time thinking about this kind of thing.
Would you class that as a would you class that as a positive thing or a negative thing then? That this change has happened where everything's no longer bundled together.
For me, it's a negative thing, but again, like, you know, I'm coming from the perspective of a you know, middle-aged bloke who like remembers the good old days. On the one hand, what you don't want to happen is like people in power to be gatekeepers over what you hear, which is kind of that's what things were like when it's the only way of getting music out there are national radio stations, Top of the Pops, or the other couple of music programs were on telly back then when there were only like 4 channels. The gatekeeping of that was really limiting in some ways. At the moment, though, the gates have kind of been opened, but you are really led down one path where you won't often hear things that are like outside of your comfort zone. That's the way streaming works. That's the way YouTube works. You know, if the autoplay, whatever video is going to play afterwards, is going to be based on the things you've already looked at. For me, it can get quite odd because on the one hand, I've got like the music that I might be listening to, but also the music that my kids are listening to. So there's a bit of like randomness put in there because there's more than one person using that stream. But for the most part, I don't think that does happen. And those systems aren't designed for it to happen. It'll change, but I'm just not sure how that'll happen.
As you said, there's no gatekeeping, but there is definitely an oversaturation. And I feel like when it comes to a lot of indie artists, that's more of a hindrance than I think the gatekeeping was. But I don't know, as someone who's been around when radio's dominated the music industry, would you say that there's a difference between the gatekeeping and sort of the oversaturation is like a hindrance?
Yeah, well, the two are definitely linked, and like we said earlier, it's like it's easy to make a record in your bedroom now. Loads more people are making records. Even that is like shows off my age, doesn't it? Loads more people are recording songs and putting them out there, and probably people are getting better with those skills in a way that they couldn't do when we first started. This is like back into the early 90s. We maybe had like 2 days in the studio every year or two. You don't get good at recording by doing that. And now, even on a program which is basically free, like GarageBand, you can get really good at doing it. But there is so much out there. There's such a surplus of supply. It's more difficult than ever for things to break through. And that's why like we're in a different position, because we got our foot in the door when things were really, really different. And in a way, we got our foot in the door because the Futureheads of Maximo Park were successful and we were just associated with them, even though like musically we were kind of off to the side again.
I think personally what sort of like solidifies like an indie artist as an indie artist, I know it's quite a trivial thing, is getting a Daytrotter session. I think that's one of the
no, that's a good one.
Yeah, because like literally every indie band wants to, I feel like they get to a certain point, get a Daytrotter session. So I just wanted to ask, like, how did that such like deep cut for a field music sort of like come around? Because as far as I can tell, not a lot of people have actually like listened to the Daytrotter session, but it is a really, really good session you have done for them.
I mean, at that time, we toured in the States quite a lot. We did everything we could do at the level we were at. So, we didn't get invited on like Letterman or whatever, but we did sessions for KCRW, which is a big student radio station out of Santa Monica. We did sessions for KXP, which again is, most of these are actually like on campus in Seattle. And we did Daytrotter. In 2010, we went over to the States 3 times. It cost a bloody fortune, and it was fun, but really, really hard work. But that's where we were at in terms of like trying to sell your records in the States. We're actually there's less national press. There's no national radio. Every radio is local. So how you get your music out there is not the same as in the UK. Whereas, for us here, there's a handful of monthly music magazines.
Mhm.
There are broadsheet newspapers. All of these are national. There's Six Music and, a couple of DJs on Radio X. And that's the primary way that we would get through to people. In the States, everything is still much, much more localized and very dependent on things that grew out of either community radio or student radio.
What is sort of like one of the differences between how you approach a field music project compared to how you approach your solo stuff?
It's mostly to do with how complete an idea we have of what we want it to be. If I've got an idea and it's just like, it's going to be this, it's going to take in these musical factors and lyrically it's going to deal with this thing, that's usually easier to do as a solo project. Yeah, that's kind of been the way it's worked for all of them. The first solo records we did, so that was the first School of Language record in 2008 and Peter's the Week That Was album. At that time, we didn't know whether we were going to do more field music. Making the first two albums, or especially touring those first two albums, before people had really found out about our band, and when we were still working full time mostly, that was really, really hard, and it really did us in. And we felt like we were being compared to Kaiser Chiefs all the time. We do on way down festival bills alongside bands who we really didn't feel any kinship with at all. So those first solo records were just like, well, what do we do now? Well, I'm still going to make music. It's just we're not going to do field music maybe. After that, it's been more to do with a conceptual thing. So the second School of Language album was like, right, well, I really want to make this clattery pop funk album about my final year of university and how I felt then before I met my wife and what kind of person I was then, because I kind of knew that my relationship to the person I was when I was 20, 21 was about to change because my son was about to be born. It's like, this is me saying farewell to that.
Yeah, you released a School of Language song earlier in the year, didn't you? Last year.
And yeah, I did a little EP, a little Prince tribute EP. Because what else am I going to do in the hour a day that I had while the kids were busy playing on their tablets and we couldn't get in the studio to finish the new field music album? I feel terrible if I'm not writing and recording stuff. I really need to do it. So that's why I ended up doing that. It came actually from a band from Sunderland called Picnic. Were doing.
Yes. Yeah.
They'd asked a load of artists to cover one of their songs, and when I took it, it's like, what do I do with this? I don't know what to do with this. And I'll do a drum beat. Oh, that drum beat sounds like Prince. That's what I'm going to do with this song.
That was on my list of deep cuts for field music. You teased Flat White Moon all the way back in May, and Making New World had only just come out in January. So how soon did you was it as soon as lockdown started? Is that when you started development of Flat White Moon? Or
so we are a bit ahead of ourselves because Making a New World was written as a performance for the Imperial War Museum, and we started writing it in September 2018 for a performance in January 2019. Played at the Imperial War Museum in Salford. And then the next week, we played at the Imperial War Museum in London. Then the week after that, we got together in the studio and recorded the whole thing. But essentially, 3/4 of the album was recorded in that day at the beginning of February 2019. Even though it didn't come out until January 2020, we were already starting to think about, what's the next set of songs we're going to do. We started recording probably in October 2019, and we knew it was going to be a bit bitty because we were also touring Making a New World across that period. So by the time lockdown kicked in, we had already recorded the basic tracks. We probably recorded the basic tracks 8 or 9 songs, a couple of which then we didn't actually put on the album. And it wasn't until we kind of got back together in the summer that we finished it off. But yeah, because of this gap between writing Making a New World and it coming out, we've had a lot of extra time where we've been working on these songs. And I still feel oh yeah, this is good. we're now really ahead of ourselves. So, I'm busy working on other songs for another project we're going to do later this summer. In a way, I'm keen to do it because one of the worst things when we first started was the period in between finishing an album and it coming out when you felt like you were just waiting and you felt like, oh, I should be doing new stuff. But it was really difficult mentally to allow yourself to do that.
Mhm.
And becomes really frustrating. And like I say, I want to be writing. So
I've been really enjoying the teasers for Fly White Moon so far. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned that Making New World was all one session, because I definitely feel like that the sort of lead-ins between these songs definitely enhances it as a project. I like how it just feels like one big thing.
it was all designed to be done along to a continuous video track. When you play a brand new song in front of people, you don't know how they're going to respond. So leaving a space for people to clap seems like a big risk. So we deliberately did it. So it's just like, we're just going to do it in one go. We're going to let people try and digest the whole thing. If they don't clap right at the end, that's fine, because we'll be off the stage and it won't be too embarrassing. But it made sense with the concept of the album for it to flow as one thing.
A lot of the songs on it work as individual songs. I think Shot to the Arm was probably my favorite around that time. Money is a Memory was also another one of those tracks which I thought worked really well by themselves. Was that like part of the process? And you think, oh, we could make this into a single?
I mean, not while we were writing, because when we were writing, we weren't even thinking about whether it would be a release, really. But there was a sense, because when we played these songs at the performance, it was going to be brand new music to everyone listening. We weren't doing any hits to any field music hits to get people in the mood. I certainly had a sense that we need to make this quite immediate. We need people to be able to get it like right there and then when it's the first time you hear them. So, we could have done something that was artier and more complicated and less accessible. I felt it was a good idea. It's like, let's make this make sense to someone. It's going to be a lot to take in, but like if we melodically strong and with bits that you're going to find yourself singing along with by the end of the song, it'll be that much better an experience for the people who are actually like at these shows hearing all this music for the first time.
You did try to do a live stream of it over lockdown. I just wanted to ask what happened with it, because it seemed like something had gone wrong.
Basically, the way that YouTube compresses video is slightly different from the way it compresses audio. And we didn't realize that video compressed and uploaded to YouTube fairly easily, but then there were glitches in the audio. We basically don't know how to make these things work. And the guys who did the filming for us, what they were keen to do was use analog equipment as far as possible. They were the old analog cameras, some of which I think came from the TV show The Tube. They were all like Time Tease cameras. Even going as far as the visual mixer, where you do the green screen, the chroma key, that was also analog. So everyone's focus was on everything up to the point where it goes into the computer. And then it's just like, oh, actually, we have no experience or expertise at this. What we foolishly did was we thought, if we're really going to do this, it has to be really, really live. We knew that quite a lot of the live streams that had been on had been recorded beforehand and then uploaded. And it was like, oh, no, we don't want to do that. That's cheating. In retrospect, that was massive naivety on our part.
Do you think there's ever a chance that like live stream gigs will ever make do you think they'll ever have a future outside of the lockdown?
I think they will have a future. I think people have realized that it is good for certain kinds of things. It can't replicate the experience of being in a room with other people. I mean, to a certain extent, you go and see a gig because you want to be in the same room as the person you're going to see. Live streams can't do that. I can't chat to people at the merch table on a live stream, which is kind of what we do at a gig. But I do think there's a place for it. And especially, it's difficult for us to go over to the States now. It's expensive, and we can't necessarily afford to go and do it for fun anymore. Like, we're not kids anymore. It's one way that the people who listen to our records in other parts of the world can actually see what we do and enjoy it. It's not the same, but it's an okay compromise.
Are you looking forward to getting back on tour?
I'm looking forward to that being like okay. a few festivals across the summer. On the one hand, I'm like, oh yeah, cool. And on the other hand, I'm thinking, oh, at some point this is going to get cancelled, which is just like where everyone's at with gigs at the moment, and not just bands, but like people who've bought tickets, like they're really like willing it to happen, but at the same time, there's a bit in the back of your mind thinking, this is not going to happen. So we shall see.
I think that's probably the best attitude to have for it at the moment.
I'm praying it happens. I'm hoping so much. I know they're doing test runs in June or something, and I hope they go well because
I mean, there's
got
so many factors at play. I mean, you know, and whether it's easier to do outdoor shows or whether that makes the social distancing harder to enforce, or you know, there are so many practicalities, you know, depending on where things are at with the public health. It's a really tricky thing to weigh up, and I mean, I really feel for my friends who work in or run venues. Like, I know they've had a certain amount of government support, but like, this is what they do. You know, this is their entire life. It's not so bad for me and Peter because we could just like, okay, well, we'll settle back in the studio and we'll work on songs and we'll find things to do. Touring is a relatively small part of what we do. You know, we'll go and do 10 gigs every 2 years. It's almost like that. It's a bit more than that. But, you know, a UK tour for us is probably 10 or 12 dates. It all happens in 1 month, you know, around the time an album comes out. So there's a lot else we can do. But yeah, if you're a sound engineer, it's what you do all day long, every day. That's a strange thing to have taken away from you.
On a more positive note, what's been your favourite tour you've ever done?
Ooh, that is a good question, and I don't know how to answer it. We did a tour in, I'm going to say it was a UK tour in 2012 where we had Steel and Sheep along to support us, and it was a really good combination. And it was also, for us, one of those tours where we came away from every gig thinking, oh, wow, people came to see us. People actually came to see our band. And after like the early years of doing a band where 1 in 10 gigs is good, to go to that where it's like every gig on this tour is like just great, and there's people here and they know our songs and they don't mind if we do a weird one, and you know, people want to chat at the merch table, and we've brought this band along who I think people are a little bit surprised by and are really enjoying. That was a nice combination. But even then, it's like I can't even remember which venues we played on that. We played I can't even remember which venues we played at. The Bodega in Nottingham sticks out. And then there's been some which are just like a great experience, even though it was difficult. So I toured the first School of Language album in the States with musicians from Chicago. And we did a really, like for me, a really long tour. I think we played something like 21 gigs in 24 days. But I got to the end of it thinking, oh my God, I can really play guitar now. I can really play guitar now. That's great. And I'd seen a lot and just had an interesting experience despite it being really, really hard work.
And then narrow it down a little bit more. What's been your favourite performance that you've done?
The one that sticks out in my mind is playing at Green Man Festival, I think in 2016. Green Man's middle of August, so it's kind of getting towards the end of the festival season. And that year we'd played a lot of festivals. We'd said specifically, you know, we're gonna do as many festivals as we can, really. And a lot of them like weren't great for us. We're not a festival kind of band. We expect like quite a lot of engagement from the audience. Like, you've got to come to us, really. We're not going to pull you in with anthemic choruses or something. You know, we don't do that kind of thing. So a lot of the festivals have been a bit difficult, a bit kind of dispiriting. And then we got to this one at Green Man thinking, is this going to be another one like that? It's Green Man, so it's like that. It's really like our kind of audience, and we were playing fairly late in the big tent. And actually, the tent was packed, and people were really into it, and we played well, and it was just fun and a relief. And one of those moments where you think, oh yeah, we're a real band that actual people like to listen to. So the build up to that was important more than, you know, what we actually played. I can't even remember what we played. But it sticks out because of that.
Something I wanted to touch on with Flat White Moon is it got a Dink Edition? That's so cool. Like,
yeah. I mean, it's the first time Field Music have done a Dink Edition, but actually, Peter's album with Sarah Hayes under the name You Tell Me was one of the first ones. I think it was number 3 or number 4. And at this stage, like, we kind of know quite a few of the record shops who are involved in putting together Dinked, because they tend to be the same record shops who are great at supporting new independent music, and the kind of record shops where we might go and do in stores. So it's a nice kind of like community thing. So when they suggested it, it was like, oh yeah, of course, yeah. Let's think of a nice way of doing it. So we've got a nice picture disc with a clear vinyl sleeve.
But yeah, you also got a record store day drop last year, didn't you?
Did we? I can't remember. We've done a few things for Record Store Day over the years. We did a film soundtrack for an old black and white documentary called Drifters. That was a Record Store Day thing.
Drifters! You did a soundtrack for Gerson's The 1929 one.
We did indeed.
Yeah, I did film, and I had to talk about that in my essay recently. Because
it's one of the very first things that was considered a documentary, and it's a fascinating film. Although when we did it, it was another one that we did like as a live performance, and we had to sit either side of the screen in order to see all of the cues on the screen, and it really made us all feel seasick to do it like that, right next to a 12-foot high screen, and it's even when you're watching it on telly, it makes you feel a little bit seasick. Being right next to the screen was, makes my stomach tumble a little bit.
I'll tell my course leader. They'll be amazed that I talked to the person who did the soundtrack. But maybe I might have actually watched it, because I remember I had to watch it and I asked the teacher, who did the soundtrack? And she said, there's not supposed to be one on it.
Actually, well, the current BFI version has a really interesting soundtrack made by this vocal artist. So he makes all of the sound with his mouth and effects pedals and stuff. And I think that's the version that's on the BFI. And because they had done that fairly recently, we couldn't get the rights to put out a version. So our version, unfortunately, is audio only. But if you see the track titles, you'll be able to tell exactly what's going on, because it's like Hauling Part 1 and Dogfish and Conger, or whatever, conger eels. Like, so we did that we did a kind of silvery grey coloured vinyl for Drifters, and that was like 2015 Record Store Day. And we did a Pet Shop Boys cover 7-inch for Record Store Day, but I'm sure we've done a couple of reissues actually, because now we're getting to the point where it's like we've got anniversaries of everything we did. Maybe last year it was 10 years since Measure.
It is really impressive that you stayed within the industry for over 15 years now. I don't know, not many bands do that.
No, and there's a very specific set of circumstances which allows us to do that. One of which is we live in the Northeast, and we live in Sunderland specifically, and it's a cheap place to live. It's a really cheap place to live. It's a cheap place to have space. We've always been willing to do the work to do things ourselves. Makes a big difference. If I'd been so desperate to have a drink at our gigs that we needed to get a driver, we wouldn't have been able to keep making music for this long. Like, that's the kind of margins that you're looking at on a tour being profitable. It's like, well, if we have to have a driver along who are paying 100 quid a day plus 40 quid a night extra for a room, then suddenly we can't tour anymore. Or if we had to have someone else mix our albums and it was going to cost like £3,000 to get someone really good to mix our album. We wouldn't be able to make, by being willing to do loads of the boring stuff, driving the van, doing our VAT returns ourselves. We can just about manage to keep going without ever having to become famous to do it. Like, we can maintain things at a particular level.
Mm-hmm.
For now, obviously, because of the nature of like music consumption, being so different, and sales of physical records have gone down, and the economics of streaming at the moment mean that it doesn't pick up the slack from record sales falling. It continues to be tricky for us, but yeah, we're still here.
I mean, you wouldn't have thought sales were going down by how like quickly Daft Punk records sold out when they announced they were breaking up and stuff.
It's. I mean, the obviously we're not on that kind of level, but like at the very top, people are still making a lot of money from every format, and gig tickets are really expensive. Daft Punk had done a tour. It wouldn't be out of the realms of possibility that they'd be charging £100 a ticket for just like the standard thing. But I mean, that I don't like that. I like the idea that music's really accessible. I love the fact that you can get like a brand new CD, a new release CD for like £9 or whatever, £8 or £9. It's like, that's good. If you can then go and see the band for a tenner, £12, I really like that. I like it to be accessible in that way.
Yeah, that's why I hope like shops like HMV never go out of business, because it is that sort of like even talking about field music, I remember it must have either been the day of the release or the day afterwards. I remember walking in, only in a Woman's World was playing. I remember buying the CD, and like it's just the fact that, as you said, it is just accessible that just makes it so good.
I mean, I love like tiny indie record shops, but HMV are the one thing like that's still like that top of the pops thing where everything, if it's successful enough, which doesn't have to be all that successful, is all just like chucked in the mix. You go in and there's every kind of music. You are confronted with everything. It's not like separated into all these different strands and you go and find your strand. Rock and pop essentially in HMV covers almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
Almost. I like that. I mean, I bought a lot of records at HMV and discovered a lot of stuff through that kind of like all chucked in the pot record shop. You're not guided by anything. It's almost accidental, but in a way that's a really fun thing.
Is it a weird experience walking in HMV or Reflex in Newcastle or Beatdown, and then you're seeing field music?
Yeah, it's still a little bit strange. Not as strange as it was.
I wanted to kind of ask, what made you, where did your love for music kind of start? So obviously it's a band with you and your brother, so I'm guessing you two egged each other on a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, our mum and dad weren't into music in a really like serious, deep way. They had the records of their era and we listened to those. I mean, we got obsessed by Bros when Bros came out in 1987, and got a bit obsessed by Michael Jackson when Bad came out about the same time. And then at some point, Peter decided that he was going to learn to play the drums. And it might have been after seeing the Bangles on Top of the Pops, actually, where the drummer sang. He was like really taken with that idea. My dad took me with him to go and look at this cheap drum kit that he was going to get my brother for Christmas. I think he knocked him down from £100 to £80 for this little Premier drum kit. And then I just wanted in, really. So the thing that happened to me was that I'd saved my pocket money to take on holiday. We were going on a holiday to what was then Yugoslavia. And while we were there, the currency was devalued. So the act of converting pounds to the Yugoslav currency became very difficult for a 9-year-old actually at the time. that I ended up bringing most of my holiday money back and spent it on an acoustic guitar from Argos, which I still have and still use occasionally. I mean, we just totally loved doing it, and there was a certain amount of like competitive, like, oh, Peter can play that chord and Peter can play a proper G and I can't do a G, so I have to practice. Although I think what happened with us is we got into playing much more than we got into listening to music at that stage, and we were playing around the local pubs, you know, when I was about 14. But it wasn't until we stopped doing that and like, okay, what are we doing? And started discovering music and discovering more esoteric music that we really like just fell down the wormhole of this is what we do, and making stuff and trying to make stuff that's unique to us is what we do.
You've talked about a lot of youth projects, and I know you and your wife do We Make Culture, isn't it?
I don't do it. She does it.
She does it.
I occasionally I'm allowed to help.
Allowed.
We get to give the help that we could have done with when we were that age. And it's great with the Young Musicians project that my wife does. It's because there's just so many really talented young people, and it's not as like band and lad focused as everything we ever did when we were that age. So it's really gratifying to see like good songwriting, actually like genuinely interesting lyrics and melodies. You know, when I was 18, all of my songs were just terrible and about like not getting to gan out with some lass, and that was it. And these young songwriters are doing something that's much more interesting. And if what I can do is say, okay, well, that song you've done, it's just a couple of steps on for you to make that into a record, which is interesting as well. And you can take control of this and say, this is how I want it to sound. These are the records I like. I like these elements of these records. And then they start to become like the people who are in charge of their music, rather than being a good singer and a songwriter and then having some middle-aged bloke like me telling them what to do, which I think would be a really bad thing.
Yeah. I'm going to have a quick... Is there any other questions you want to ask, Joe? I'll have a quick skim through what I've got left.
Well, I guess the big one is because we're at a album review show, mostly. What's your favorite album of all time?
I don't have one. That's impossible. That's an
Okay,
impossible
top
question.
five. We always have this. We always say what's your favorite one, and then we have to say top five.
It's either you should have prepared us for this question, or can we make it a top 3 or top 5? That's always the first answers we get.
If I frame it as not favorite, but like the things which I continually go back to and find inspiration from, I would put things like Parade by Prince in there. I would put at least one Beatles album in, probably Sgt. Pepper's. I would be inclined to put in Blonde on Blonde by Bob Dylan, because again, it's just like a constant source of inspiration for me. I would probably put in the first Sly and the Family Stone album, which is called A Whole New Thing, which wasn't successful at the time, but now I think it's ready for a reevaluation because it's really clever and funny and funky and original. And then I don't know, maybe something like Walk Across the Rooftops by the Blue Nile, which is their first album, which is another like really unique sounding record with a very particular kind of songwriting, simple in some ways, like a really direct expression.
Yeah, my last question is, will you ever be using Comic Sans again to promote something?
Who knows? I mean, if I do, you can be sure that I've chosen very carefully to use Comic Sans. It's not something that I would do by accident. I don't think you can play around with a typeface like Comic Sans. I think you have to embrace it for what it is. And if you are, doing a parody YouTube tutorial video occasionally, use of Comic Sans is justified. I did think about it. We did have a little email discussion. Like, is it too far to do Comic Sans? Will people appreciate why I've done this? And we decided just to go with it.
I think you should double down. Everything should be Comic Sans from now on.
I don't think the rest of the band. I don't think Peter will go for that. I think it's something you have to use in a very defined way.
Mm-hmm. It's very fragile, isn't it? You have to be precise how you use it.
Pay respect to Comic Sans. That's what I would say.
We all saw it in school. We all saw it. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this interview.
Good
to
speak to you both. I'm sorry that I can talk so much in such detail about things which matter so little.
Quickly, I just remembered we did do a poll, which was sort of just album of the year sort of thing for different categories, and we did best local album, and Field Music did win that one by a landslide. So you are very I don't know the word. Loved, yeah, loved
tolerated by the music listeners of the Northeast, grudgingly respected by music listeners of the Northeast. I appreciate that.
Good stuff. I hope you enjoyed the rest of your day. Thank you again.
Thanks. Great to speak to you both.
Cool.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Stop going.